This is my studio. 4 months ago, storms came and washed the supports out from underneath the studio. I'm just going to walk through it. This is what I might lose imminently if the storms come back. We have the storms because of climate change. This is where I think. This is where I work. Everything that I do here is a way for me to think out what's happening to us, what's happening to me. Everything I produce here represents some of that thinking. Now, I'm completely overwhelmed by the effect of the storms. Not just the supports were washed out, my neighbor's pier was washed out. This is where I think. This is where I sit. This could all be gone in a flash. There's nothing I can do about it. All I can do is make the work that I think might address the problem. The problem is the lack of consciousness, the lack of empathy. I can't even open the door. It's just all too overwhelming.
A very warm welcome to all of you here in the room with us at UCL East, and also to those of you who are joining online. Please remember to mute your mics if you're not speaking. We will have an opportunity for Q&A later. So this is an event about art, but it's also about consequence of planetary destruction. What we're going to show you today is based upon the works in a book that we created. And I co-edited it with Professor David Osrin, who is an urbanist and Professor of Global Health at UCL. My name is Arati Prasad. I am a writer and a researcher at University College London. We created this book as part of a research project. It was funded by Wellcome, and the aim of the project was to look at how we can make cities more sustainable, faster, for the health of people and the health of the planet. So we worked with a lot of scientists who were gathering and analyzing data, and we worked with governments, local governments of cities in countries around the world. And the idea was that the science, the great robust science that we were generating, would directly reach the desks of the policymakers, because policymakers and governments have the ability to act on good science and implement positive change, right? But as we know, the world is much more complicated than that. And so we had been thinking for a long time about different means of communicating climate science to decision makers. The bulk of my project was in Kenya, and I started working with a filmmaker called Joy Obuya in Nairobi, with an artist called James Muriuki, whose film you will see shortly, and also with an amazing journalist called Bernard Okebe in a city called Kisumu. And he works with communities using media to empower people to tell their stories to governments. Those are elderly farmers who notice that the seasons aren't changing as they used to and face food insecurity. Those are elderly and young waste pickers in informal settlements who cannot deal with the burgeoning amount of plastic waste, or young people who are fed up of the water pollution and the lack of sanitation in their neighborhoods. So we use those narratives, those writings. Radio broadcast was very useful in Kenya. We used images and we used films. And it was so interesting because we showed some of those films to the scientists we worked with and to the decision makers we worked with. And the way they engaged with them was so palpably different. And they asked for more. So we thought, what is it about the creative outputs we were making that allowed these politicians to engage with the science we were communicating in a way that all those graphs and all those complicated flowcharts did not? Then we decided to reach out to other people whose creative practice engaged with environmental themes. We knew a few of them, but the vast majority we didn't know, and we wrote to them literally speculatively. And the response we got was overwhelming and enthusiastic. And so this book is a collection of their ideas. There are 32 artists from different countries, from Algeria to Australia, from Iceland to India, Lebanon to Nigeria, Panama, and Peru. And when we made the book, we worked with a local London-based design agency called Human After All. And they did too good a job of reflecting the theme of destruction, because they incorporated into the pages strategic perforations, and they invited the readers to destroy it, to take from it what they wanted, a beautiful image, an interesting article. But they also added a caution. They said, do as you please, but remember that what you take cannot always be put back, and what you destroy cannot always be revived. So today in this room, you're going to see a number of works in different formats from some of the artists that we've worked with. There are works of art around the room, Ali Husseini in that corner, Mariana Heilman here, Himani Gupta in that corner, and we have some of our artists online as well. We will have words, images, music, and a short film. We also have popcorn to go with the film, so please help yourself. And we have some interviews, and for the interviews, we partnered with Good Growth Hub. They are an organization, a space right next door in Hackney Wick, and they work with people aged between 18 and 30 to give them advice, networks, training, and paid opportunities here in the Olympic Park. So we had 4 wonderful people who worked with Good Growth Hub. They are at the start of their creative careers. They are Rivka, Abalaji, Nana, and Luke. And over the last week or 2, they spoke to some of the artists that we work with, and they interviewed them, and they asked them about their creative practice and why they were so passionate about engaging with environmental themes. So please enjoy the interviews and the presentations. We have drinks already. We'll have more after the event. Please stay and talk to us more, because we would love to keep having this conversation with you. Thank you.
I'm kind of a sucker for an urban river. A tidal urban river is like my favorite thing to deal with. The idea that we have this like living beast, this liquid beast that rises and falls twice a day. I love the fact that there's a bigger rhythm out there that we can observe. Trying to make a work that brings people down to meet the river, see the changes, so they might get to know it, and then they'll get to love it, and then they'll want to preserve it.
A lot of people doesn't stop and take time out to actually breathe and enjoy life. So out here, you actually get that sense of feeling.
Not that many places have tidal rivers. Philadelphia is a good hour and a half from the ocean, but that is the ocean pushing this tide up the Delaware and then up the Schuylkill. Only the fishermen know, and occasional kayakers. Tide field gives you a way to look out on the river and to know, are we at high tide, are we at half tide, or are we at low tide? So if you can only see the top 3 red buoys, that's high tide. And then as the tide drops to half tide, the buoy strands will start to arc in a kind of caterpillar-like arch. And then when the tide is low, they lay out like sleepy caterpillars on the water. So you get a full 3 colors at low tide and less as the tide rises. All right. I like putting my art in places where people will unexpectedly come across it. And particularly if they have a repeat visit, they'll start to see slight changes happening in the piece. The surface of the water is very animated, but we kind of lose track of that. But if you put something out there that captures that animation and amplifies it, you really see how variable the water surface is. There are micro patterns of wind blowing through, and these things are responding in a big way. I hope that people come down to the river and spend more time with nature and start to see the tide and get that feeling that I get, like, wow, nature's happening here. It's happening in my backyard, and getting the sense that I'm at home in the world.
In the book, Aviva, you speak about the idea of like housekeeping. So I kind of wanted to ask what housekeeping represents to you in this context in regards to preserving the environment and in relation to your work as well.
Well, in the original Aramaic of the Bible, the part that King James translated as "you have dominion over the whole earth," the original Greek was "you have responsibility for everything on the earth." And the English term for that is husbandry. You take care of the farm, you take care of the animals. You do that before you take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Housekeeping is a relatively pejorative term from a class point of view about people who take care of the earth. They take care of households. And I like the term housekeeping because it's modest. It's humble. It's just put things away, keep things clean, make sure that life in the home is orderly. And that is not what we're doing. And that is exactly what we need to do. We need to have an orderly home. So that's what housekeeping means to me. We don't need to be the stars of the content. The star of the content that interests me is how are we squandering the brilliant opportunities we have in life. And one of those brilliant opportunities is how we housekeep the world that we live in. So that's still my concern. And as though the sea were a parent that's going to chide us, the sea will have the last word on this argument. We are behaving like cruel children in the world who've never been set appropriate boundaries. So the sea is going to set the boundaries. But the ocean doesn't care. The ocean will have the last word. Whatever it was, what I did or anybody else did, is apparently not enough.
And do you kind of feel like a sense of, because I guess all of this is happening quite imminently, do you feel a sense of fear that your work is kind of, there's a chance that it might not be able to be preserved, and like you said, the ocean will have the last word? Does that fill you with a kind of fear, or does it kind of like do the opposite and kind of like call you to action?
Both. So either I compromise and save a little bit of my work and give up on the rest, or I wait and watch the ocean take my work to Portugal. And I've always thought that art was the most powerful way you could make any statement in life. The difference between what I'm doing with art and what other people might be doing with art is I'm very pragmatic about that idea. I want there to be a real way to do it, not just talk about it, lament about it.
I kind of wanted to ask about what your thoughts on in terms of like how important it is that the work of, I guess, eco artists like yourself, the importance of them being kind of documented in journals, in academic entries, in the kind of books that David and Arathi are writing, and what are your thoughts on how important it is for your work to kind of be documented in this way and archived?
You know, that's true. The museums, the galleries, they are presenting important work. And it used to be that there were a group of people that were called opinion makers that could influence a lot of people. Right now, as far as I can tell, influencers are selling makeup. Maybe in the galleries, the museums, the journals, we can present, I hope, self-disciplined ideas. But everybody has a place in a net of in biological terms, it's ecotones. It's all the transitions from one piece of habitat to another piece of habitat. We need to get to the point where we can provide those ecotones for the earth and for each other. And every little tiny piece of each of those ecotones is critical. The insects, the plants, the flow of water, the temperatures. We are part of that.
Hata mimi natafuta hizi vitu. Unazitoanga wapi hizi? Unaona hata mimi nimeanza kuokota. Part of my sort of general understanding is anything could be waste and everything could be useful, could be, it's just a matter of perspective. I've been collecting, I've collected a few things here and there that in one way could be considered as waste. But by me collecting them, in a way deciding this is not waste, it's material that I need for this project's research. Look how healthy these goats are, So these are the guys that help clean up some of the material, Ongata Rongai, because it's a very rapid area, we find ourselves having, problems with waste management. How do we dispose of? How do we recycle? All that, has not been thought through very heavily, or even if it has been thought through, it has not much been implemented. There's many people who are coming up with ways to manage their waste, and there's many others who really don't care. As soon as they're done with something, they will put it outside of their compound, outside of their house, outside of their living area, and they don't want to think about it anymore after that. My name is Muriuki, James Muriuki. I work as an artist, primarily as an artist. I like to think of myself as a researcher. I primarily use lens-based mediums, photography. Research allows me to be much more deliberate in approaching certain ideas and focused. So in many ways, when I approach it as a research project, then it allows me to narrow down into very specific things that sort of engage them a bit more deeply. And if I can support that by making research as part of that process of making, then I do think I'm able to accomplish a much wider scope and I'm able to also transmit and share my work in a way that I may not have been able to share if I'm not approaching it as research work. A lot of my work in the last 10 years or so, try to understand or to observe, that what is our disconnect with this material so that we don't want to be part of it anymore, especially after it served us so well in other capacities. But then it transitions and transforms to a point we have to think, okay, this is no longer very useful to me. I want to get rid of it. Sometimes I don't sort of plan to go and look for something, but I go via my intuition where I observe things and then later I start sort of processing, why is this interesting? It's just being very observant of my environment. So just how that process of changing something, saying that, oh, this thing is broken, we don't need it anymore, So using that opportunity to dig into my own work, to dig into my own practice, gives me that sort of almost opens my ears and my eyes and my nose, basically all my senses. I've collected quite a lot of things and I've been photographing some of it here and taking sort of mental notes which might accompany the process either as text or as voice recordings of statements that are coming out of this research, if I may call it. Photograph this almost like a piece of jewelry, I work as an artist, and often, not always, but often the expected outcome of art research or art project is some kind of artwork. Often I let the entire process lead the way it will come out of my research. So I've not had a look at these photographs. It's a few of the ones that I did earlier. In my process, I think it's very important to include something very tactile. A lot of times we produce material and we look, on the computer it looks great, but then when you make a print, it looks very different. So in a way, I have to make prints. The way I work is to not have everything very clearly marked out. This is exactly what I'm going to do, and and this is what will come out of it. Because without leaving a bit for exploration, then I think I find for me, it's much more difficult to find new things that I never sort of could have thought of before. And I think it's by observing things carefully and sort of photographing them that for me creates new possibilities for what that object or what that thing is, For me as an artist, it's just taking that position. Look, in this sort of journey, in this process of trying to understand material and waste and the moment where we say something is no longer useful, is it possible to just take that and sort of take a moment to celebrate it and not only celebrate new things and sort of the flashiness of something new, but also something that we can say this has been very useful to me in the past. To me, art is a process, and the condition of relating to our environments and ourselves, and how we express that process. Is what art means to me.
My name is Rivka. I am a photographer, and I sort of have done lots of work in the arts. So I'm interested as well in curation and public programming and kind of community art.
Well, my name's Susie Quillinan. I'm originally from Australia. I grew up in Australia, and I've been living in Peru now for a little over 20 years. And I'm the co-director of a project called Hawapi, which has been around now for about 11 years. And what we do with Hawapi is we develop what we call encuentros, which are these sort of gatherings of mostly artists, but also other researchers in territories that are dealing with sort of very specific eco-social or political, often altogether, challenges and conflicts and struggles. And after a couple of months of working with artists on their project, we all go back up to the territory that we've been working towards that year. And the artists each develop their project, and the interventions that they develop are always in public space.
The way that you bring people together has like a political and environmental focus. I'm interested in how the environmental focus kind of came up, like why it was important to, how that kind of sparked your interest, how you got into focusing on the environmental side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of happened quite organically. I think Peru is a country, there's a lot of mining activity. There's a lot of sort of conversations around extractivism and how these resources are being sort of taken out of the country often, and how communities are sort of where the mining is taking place are often not benefiting. And so it kind of started out there. The first edition, which happened in 2012, was in a place called Cerro de Pasco, which is about 4,000 meters above sea level, and it's a huge mine that's actually existed since pre-Inca times, and it's a huge open pit mine, and so it's sort of slowly eating the town and the surrounding community as it gets bigger and bigger. Reflecting on the fact that Peru, especially at that time, it's starting to change now, but there's very much a centralization of cultural production in the country. So you'd find that a lot of artists would have to move from their towns or cities and to Lima in order to have some kind of career. And so you had this kind of centralization of kind of, I guess, cultural power, but you also had centralization of political and economic power in Lima. Artists were engaging with some of these questions of ecological destruction or extractivism. But what we felt was like, maybe it would be useful to sort of get together a group of artists and actually take them to one of these places so we can actually see with our own eyes what's going on, talk to people, hear about the complexities of it, rather than sort of opining on it from afar.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about the ongoing legacy of these projects. Sometimes at the start, it's just about bringing people together and seeing what comes of it.
Yeah, I think sort of one of our motivations here, and one of the things that we hold quite dear, is that we are not, we don't sort of go to any of the places that we work with an attitude of like, we're coming to like help, or we're coming to, introduce contemporary art to this environment.
Yeah,
we really, and when we talk to people, when we say we'd like to come here, we explain that we're doing this for the artists, because we think that the artists need to have some kind of contact if they're going to be talking about these issues. We're kind of saying, can you put up with us being here? Is that going to be okay? And that's kind of the grounds that we negotiate on. We don't negotiate on the idea that like we're going to do something for you as a community. Yeah. And that really shifts the terms of the engagement. That practice of working in public space really opens up different kind of channels of communication, which is just really about human curiosity. People just come up and they'd be like, why are you collecting stones, from the road? and that like opens up these channels of communication that allow people to talk about things that maybe, if we came in and we said, okay, we're coming to make art about the destruction of the Amazon, that would not open up channels of communication in the same way, right? We always eat together, all of our meals, and actually the eating together is a really important part of the encuentros.
I was just thinking even more generally, it can be specific to Hawapi or the environment, but what kind of keeps you going, or what where's where's the hope, I was going to say, but is there something we can look forward to or kind of think about that's more hopeful?
And I'm a really big believer in small moves and thinking about accompaniment as a really central practice. Yeah, as I was saying in the encuentros, eating together, sharing meals together every day, being in that environment where we're all sitting down to share a moment together, to talk and tell jokes and work with each other and accompany each other through these projects. I think for me that's the key to finding new ways forward. Taking that time to sort of be together and try to understand how we're all interdependent. And that's such a beautiful, rich, incredible thing to sort of grasp and work with and think about. And I think that there's so much hope just in recognizing that and engaging with that. Following our curiosity about the material world, we get to these ideas of the way politics or social or the ecological are all part of everything that we do, and that's one of the beauties of working with artists.
I'm a creative. I do video producing and I co-run a production company. And also as a hobby, I do professional wrestling.
So my name's Ian Tay. I consider myself a documentary photographer. I became known for my work through my photography documenting China's kind of economic growth, how it kind of developed. I became very interested in the environment when I was documenting in China, because quite often they will be doing these huge projects like building the Three Gorges Dam, which would be the largest dam in the world. So it was affecting a large area, but it was achieving this one big goal, a national goal. Fast forward, issues like coal mining, etc., which I also documented. I always, again, witnessed these kind of transactional costs. So it felt to me, especially in a country like China that was growing so quickly and had such big ambitions, that what they were trying to do, what there always seemed to be, was this sacrifice stroke kind of dream that was being that we are all in pursuit of, largely, because you can say that about every country, that we're trying to just improve our standard of living. But China came from a place where basically many people were were largely in poverty, and it lifted some 800 million people out of poverty, but the sacrifice was the environment. And so I became very interested in that kind of transaction that we have with the environment.
A lot of the things that I've done, I can always remember the moment that kind of switched this on and was like, all right, well.
It was my first kind of big project in China where I really tried to tell this story about the dam being built. It was affecting so many people, and it was such a huge engineering project. The thing that got me interested was the idea that on the one hand, you had a national dream, or the people who were living along the river were being asked to sacrifice their homes in order for the betterment of the country. I would say that project once made me realize that kind of transaction that was happening. And when I started working on, let's say, the coal industry in China, I was still working with the same ideas of dreams. Farmers were leaving their homes to try and find better jobs, and they were working in more dangerous environments. So they were going down inside mines, they were working in steel plants, etc. So I would photograph these guys, their portraits, but then I also photographed the landscapes the industrial landscapes that they're working in. And it was really, really overwhelming.
And what I was so impressed by was the scale. It was these massive photographs that covered so much area. When it came to positioning yourself what was it that kind of brought you to a place of like, all right, this is my spot?
That area where the river runs through from the western side of China in the north, all the way to the eastern side and empties out onto the coastline on the eastern side. I came across these landscapes as I was going to some of the coal industrial factories that I wanted to go and photograph. And for many factories and heavy industry, you need a lot of water. And so many of them were situated along the Yellow River. So when you start to put stress on that landscape, it sucks even more water out of that space. The huge part of this development in the last 30 years, but then if you go back, it's like you had civilization, all civilizations using that land. And so the land was, to my mind, tired. And so it made me think of how these landscapes were changing, but we don't think of landscapes as changing normally. So my goal was to photograph these landscapes as if they were these very still things, but somehow to leave a clue also that there was something that was either wrong with it, so it was ambiguous, that it was in some ways being challenged or taxed, you know?
Yeah.
So, but the most important thing was that I showed this beauty that was along there. But I wanted beauty, I wanted ambiguity, and I also wanted a kind of sadness that came with the work. So a sense of like maybe that the land was either getting tired or there was a kind of transaction in some way, because it's only through beauty and the loss of that you can kind of understand that, you know, then comes the question, what are we doing to ourselves, or what are we sacrificing in the process?
What change do you hope to bring from your work, from the work you've done, from the work you plan to do in the future?
When I first started working on the Yellow River stuff, it was just really, maybe a bit naively, I was kind of thinking that this could be like a love letter to the people there, you know, to remind them of the value that they had there, you know, not to forget in their pursuit to improve their lives, that they don't forget what they had. What I hope when people look at this is just more of a philosophical idea of understanding that our actions, our dreams as individuals, but also as a society, has a massive impact on the natural environment. And we have to find a way to take that into account.
Marina DeBris. I live in a walkable country in Australia, in New South Wales. Used to be Sydney based, but because I amassed so much material, i.e. rubbish, I had to move to have a space to work in. And I now live in Lake Macquarie, which is 2 hours north of Sydney. It's still have issues here, of course, with waste. I was living in Bondi Beach in Australia, in Sydney. I loved it. I just loved living near the ocean. It was just divine. And then I moved back to America. I moved to Venice Beach, California. It was very alarming. And I used my skills as a graphic designer first. And I studied at Rhode Island School of Design in Rhode Island in America. We learned very, you know, the main thing was being able to deliver a message visually without explaining it to people, because you don't have that luxury of explaining your work. It's got to make a statement. Began to envelop me, and I didn't make any money at it at all for many years, but it was I felt like it was something I had to do. I was still working as a graphic artist. Yeah, just serving a cause, doing something. Pretty much all I do now. It's an obsession, a not wanted obsession. I mean, I'd rather do something else, honestly, but can't stop. I actually wanted to be a fashion designer in art school when I went to art school, but I knew the industry would just eat me alive. I couldn't handle it. And graphic design was much more in the corporate world, which was another issue for me but working for big corporations that just were interested in making money became a real problem for me. The fashion thing started then, and that was 2009 or something. The Inconvenience Store was the first sculpture show I was in. It won the People's Choice Award, which was like a lot of, 50,000 people went to this outdoor exhibition called Sculpture by the Sea. And I had people walking into the store. I would man it often, and I fooled a lot of people, which was really fun for me because I'm a bit cheeky. I'm very into being ironic, and the humor was great. The fact that it was humorous really brought people in. So that's a major draw card. I realized that. And that was good because I can be very macabre and I can be very depressed by that issue. I've done things that I still chuckle at. And that was actually one of them, was manning the store and people thinking it was a real convenience store and asking for things. And I actually had everything they were asking for. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know I was the artist. And I heard a lot of comments that, I've had some viewers say things that are really, spot on, like someone looking at my the trash and would say, "Oh, that's beautiful and disgusting." Exactly it. And he just said, "This is like art that shouldn't exist." And I thought, that is the best I've ever heard. To this day, I don't know too many artists that use it in its raw form, ugly raw form. And that's like super important to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother, because it isn't pretty. It's a major issue. And I would, my goal is to shock people, but whether or not I do that, sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. Another thing that I would just say, find your passion. Everybody's got a passion. Everybody cares about something, as long as it's not destructive something, something for the betterment of all species, really, ultimately. Even art, just like art, music, it's all helps us. It all helps us. Math, I don't know, science. Find your passion and do something good with it. The powers that be really want to squelch us, and they just want us to be sort of subservient masses. And that's the worst thing that could ever happen, is if you just sit back and do nothing. I'm just a person, just a humanoid, trying to do what I can.
Yeah. So my name is Luke. I'm a filmmaker and screenwriter. And yeah, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself and like what you do and your contributions to the book.
Great. Oh, well, hi, Luke. Nice to meet you. I'm afraid I arrived late, but lovely to be here. My name is Oriel Cullen. I'm a curator of fashion and textiles at the V&A Museum. in South Kensington. And I was talking about one of our programs, which is titled Fashion in Motion, which has been running at the museum since 1999. And it is a performative event. So we work with creatives, a lot of designers, but also fashion creatives, to bring their work into the museum and to stage a live performance over the course of one day. So it started very modestly with the idea of bringing movement into the museum. And it was sort of two models wandering around wearing a series of Philip Tracy hats, but then it grew and grew, and it's now a sort of big staged event with, I think we have about 1,000 people over the course of the day.
One of the questions, the question I wanted to ask was, I was looking at the closer, sorry. One of the artists, Phoebe Magugu, he was picking up pieces from the streets in Johannesburg, and what I was really impressed by was how he took these pieces, put them all together, and really made them look like anything you would see on any fashion week. He really took and recycled something to make it really high fashion. So my question really is based on that kind of design, those type of ideas, what do you think, or how do you feel like that can affect the fashion industry on a large scale moving forward, and how we consume high fashion?
Thank you. I mean, I think there's so many interesting statistics about fashion being one of the worst industries for polluting. And it's really, I mean, I don't know if there are people here who are sort of working in fashion, but for a lot of younger practitioners now, they sort of see themselves more a lot of the time as sort of artists and multimedia creatives, because you're going to fashion school, but you're also being told don't produce. And for a while, a few years ago, a lot of designers were using dead stock materials, so leftovers, and trying not to use virgin materials, but there's only a finite stock of that. So it's been really interesting to see how young designers are sort of grappling with that. And with Tebe, it was he's based in South Africa, and he was looking at a secondhand market called Denutsa in Johannesburg, and that's where he went to find inspiration and to find garments. And there's a lovely film of him talking about the collection on his website. So he took all of these garments and repurposed them and sort of draped them on the mannequin, and you can see him working with that to sort of inspire his collection and sort of really make a point about all of these, all of the tons and tons of clothing that is produced every year. And while a lot of creators are really conscious of the problems and trying to find solutions, at the same time we have this mass fast fashion. So I think there's one statistic which I should know, but since 2000 we've produced more clothing than in the history of the world before, and that's quite depressing. And then you have arguments of people saying, well, fast fashion means it's democratic and it's accessible, and why shouldn't I be able to have a the opportunity to wear things? So it's a difficult argument, and it hits people very much at different times in their lives as well too. So I think, sorry, to come back to your question, I think it's really important with people like Tebe, the messages that they're sending out, the way that they're working, and with a lot of other designers that we work with who are looking for solutions, not always producing big collections, producing things to order as well, which is a much better way of working. It's challenging, but I think that's really something that's key. And just sort of expressing the importance, it's a challenging situation to be in, that you are a fashion designer and people sort of vilifying you and saying you're part of the problem, but fashion is not going away. And I think, as I said, fast fashion is such a problem, and it's quite inspiring to see these creatives who are suggesting new ways of working. So yeah, I think Tebe is a really a great designer and very much someone who works in that way. So.
I guess my last question is is a bit more like a selfish question. Is I was too close again. Sorry. Is so working with Good Growth and on this project as somebody who knows about climate change but wasn't really clued up. And this was a perfect opportunity to kind of ask people, where could I help? And I consume fast fashion all the time, and I know it's bad, but I do it because I express myself through how I wear, or from what I wear, and I like to feel fresh every time there's an event I'm going to, or whatever. So I was gonna ask is, how do you feel someone like me can take recycled fashion but still feel fresh or still make it new? Because essentially you're just taking something old and repurposing it to. So for people like us who consume fast fashion and still want to look fresh but want to consume it less, what is a word of advice for us?
That's a really good question, but I mean, a very fair point. You know, people are not just going to stop consuming fashion. I think the resale market's been really interesting in the last few years, and that, you know, that has had in many ways, you know, that's not perfect by any manner of means either, but that is one sort of way of not, you know, of looking into things, that you can still find really stylish garments that aren't necessarily, you know, some people hate going to charity shops, some people love it, you know, there's great things to be found, but that's a, you know, very binary kind of thing. And I think resale platforms can be a good place to start, and also the idea of sort of trying to limit yourself, which is a challenge. You know, it's so much easier to maybe go and buy something new for an event, but to challenge yourself maybe over the course of the year, I'm only going to buy this many things, and actually how creative you can be with your own clothes and your own wardrobe. And also with friends, I think sometimes it's interesting borrowing clothes and lending clothes can be controversial. But just sort of thinking about that and how we consume, and even making a difference of sort of, you know, people aren't necessarily going to cut back altogether and say, I'm not buying anything new this year, but just consciously to say, okay, what am I doing in the next few months? What would it be like if I limited myself to something, and thinking of it about that way? I think it's really just about being conscious and seeking out these alternatives, because not everyone can make, you know, do something amazing like Tebe, take some, you know, something that is essentially rags to some people and make it into a collection, and you want to feel good at the same time. So I think it's sort of looking at all these different avenues and just maybe challenging yourself in a way. Yeah, that's what I'd say. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
We would like to know at this juncture if any of you in the room have any questions, or indeed if anyone online has any questions. Or we have a number of our contributor artists who are also online. If you would like to say something, you are welcome to. We would love to hear from you.
I can see Asien, Aviva, Florian online. Oh, Bernard, you've got your hand up. Hi, it's Bernard Okebe from Semi K in Kisumu, Kenya. Bernard, try unmuting yourself. I think.
Okay. Hi everyone. Hi everyone. My name is Bernard. Just like David has said, I really don't have a question. I really just wanted to appreciate the work of the people who worked on this, and appreciate the organizers for the launch. Thanks so much, Arati, and thanks so much, David Austin. I must say that I was associated with this work, the work that Arati talked of in opening remarks. I'm in Kisumu, where they, Arati and David, were working on this project. So I really appreciate, and I'm happy that Semi-K is associated with this work. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bernard. Anyone else online want to say anything?
I don't have very much to say, David, just to really reiterate what has emerged from Bernard's comments and from all the presentations. And I'm sorry I can't quite read the mood in the room, but I imagine it being very festive, and so it should be, because it's a really extraordinary achievement. I mentioned the project quite recently when I was speaking to a group of scholars of comparative law who are interested in sustainability, and I was I used it as a sort of really powerful example, in my view, of sort of what it means to sort of rethink not only sustainability as cultural practice and sustainability through cultural practice, but also to broaden the scope of a project which was conceived originally not in the arts and humanities, and to sort of really make it a project which makes the expertise and the experiences of artists central. And I think that's so unique and so precious and so extraordinary. I mean, very often everybody here and everybody who's spoken must know exactly what I mean. The artists and scholars in the arts and humanities, we're sort of the decorative cherry on the cake of science-based expertise. And I think it's really fantastic what Arati and you have achieved to sort of flip that around and ask the questions in a new way. So thank you very much, and really happy to be part of it.
Everybody, I should ask you to introduce yourself, Florian, because people can't see you. But Florian is one of the contributors to the book.
Yeah, and I teach comparative literature at UCL, so a colleague of David's and Arati's. Not an artist, unfortunately, but doing my best to be as creative as I can be in my field.
Thanks, Florian. And Aviva's been waiting so patiently, and then after that, Asiem is waiting.
Thank you. I wanted to add something to my interview and make a comment and compliment everybody on a major accomplishment and for the opportunity to be included. In my interview, I said that we have to housekeep the earth. And there are two big projects that I've been involved with, each of which has taken decades. One restored actual destroyed habitat that was ghost nets, which restored habitat to a trash dump in Maine, in New England. And the other, the more current one, is about ownership. What do we own on the earth, and what obligations do we have to ownership? That's called Blue Trees, and there's going to be a major event for it this coming Wednesday that people could join in to participate by Zoom. And the point of that is that it's a few days before the American election, and the content of the event is going to be a jury trial for ecocide of people who've destroyed the environment. The key part of that event is going to be a dream that a fossil fuel executive's wife has about what her husband has done to the planet. And she's going to be judged along with her husband for ecocide. Somebody mentioned in these presentations what we sacrifice for a dream. But there's another kind of dream, which is the nightmare dream of what we're living in. Somehow we have to rethink what it means to dream, to give validation to our dreams of the real horror we're in, and reconstruct living for a dream that can bring beauty and health back to the planet. So those are my comments. If anybody wants to take them further about what it means to own the planet and have ownership of the planet, and yet not own it, to be subservient to it, I would love to hear that.
Thank you, Aviva. And if anyone wants to sign up for Aviva's Blue Trees exhibition, that we can give you, we think we can give you a pirated passcode. Asiem.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Asim. I am also a contributing author and artist to this book and this publication. And first off, I'd like to congratulate everyone on this major accomplishment. It's been a a long process, and I'm sure a labor of love for both Arti and David. Thank you so much for affording me the privilege of being part of this. I think I'd just like to echo what everybody said, but also to bear in on the fact that based off my experience working in the NGO sector, with conservation and communities at the forefront of the climate crisis, and with the climate crisis bearing down on us like a juggernaut, I've often found that vocabularies around the conservation sector, within the conservation sector, especially pertaining to the climate crisis and to conservation, don't often keep up with the pace with which they're changing or being created within the Western conservation sector. And I think this is where I found that art is so important in acting as a bridge between the work that is so important and so critical and oftentimes very time-bound and time-restricted in the face of the impending climate crisis, and the communities that are so often the major actors in the work that needs to be done, but don't oftentimes have the vocabulary to enunciate those concepts with the immediacy that is required. So this is a very important piece of work that's resulted, and I think art in general. I know that I've had to use artistic modes of interpretation many times in my work with communities, and yeah, kudos to everybody who's been involved in this process. It's really fantastic, and yeah, thanks so much.
Brilliant. Asim, where are you speaking from?
So I am speaking from a small island called Príncipe Island, which is in the island nation of São Tomé and Príncipe, and it's located in the Gulf of Guinea off the western coast of the African continent.
And their internet's better than ours. Thank you so much. We'll take 2 questions from the room. Here is Professor Rodney Reynolds.
Thank you very much, David. Congratulations to you and Arati on this project and on the book and on this event. I'd like to engage a little bit with the words on the slide, so the work of the audience. And I suppose this is directed to the academics as well as the practitioners. What exactly is the work of the audience? How are you, conceptualizing what that is?
How are we conceptualizing what the audience is? Oh, well, I'm actually very shallow, Rodney, and I was seeing that this was the work of the audience contributing to the event, but the audience have individually and collectively much work to do. Did you want to come in?
I mean, our hope in this book is that through the perspectives of the artists who've shared their work with us, that we might be able to feel, to see what the future might hold, and to work through creative methods ourselves to imagine the change that we can make, all of us, as scientists, as policymakers, as ordinary people, to be able to contribute. The thing about the artists is they imagine. And oftentimes as scientists, as normal people, we think we don't have the power to make any change, but we do. Of course, we need policy. That makes it easier for all of us. But I think as individuals, we also need that imagination and power. And it's not that we don't have hope. It's not that, oh, the planet's destroyed and we don't. We have a lot of hope, and that's why we keep talking and we keep working. And I heard someone say, yes, everyone's talking about this, but as it hasn't been solved, we will just keep talking about it. So that's what I hope will come out of this book, that we see what the artists are doing and we try to imagine in the way that they do.
Actually, I'd like to add an answer. I'm Ali. I'm one of the contributors, but what I wanted to say is, as an artist, I think the artwork happens in the encounter of the audience or the spectator with the artwork. The artwork doesn't exist on its own. You co-create it, and that's where the work of the audience is co-creating the artwork, responding to it, and propagating whatever interpretation or creation or creativity, the inspiration that you take from it.
Thanks, Ali. And Ali will talk in a moment. I think there are just two more questions. I think you had a question. Could you say who you are as well? Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Maëlle Marchand. I'm a doctoral student in environmental epidemiology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And thanks for having me. I'm freshly new to London, so I'm very privileged to be in this space. Thank you for having me. I was quite curious, we're talking, I think this is a beautiful intersection of science and art. And it was mentioned, one of the first points was around impact on policy, which is an issue that scientists face too in this work in public health. So I was curious to see how these stories have actually resonated with policymakers. I don't quite remember who was the first speaker who came up and said that this had a positive influence on policymakers, but I'm curious to ask, what was it? What was their response? How did policymakers as spectators of this type of work respond to this?
Shall I answer that? Look, someone's going to answer.
Emma next to me said put environmental campaigners in prison. No, I think the thing that we've learned about art and artists from looking at what people have contributed to us is that, I think art engages different senses than science does when you put a graph up. It's emotional. It engages your senses. You feel, you emote, you see. Ian Tay described it as a dream-like scenario where, you really show what the people are experiencing. And when we showed those films to policymakers, they couldn't say, well, yes, next question, please. They watched the video and they saw Isaiah in Kenya picking up waste and saying, I would love to recycle properly, but I take the waste and I burn it under the bridge. And I'm very embarrassed to say I do that, but you don't give me any opportunity to recycle. And that helped them to see that real people are involved. It's not perfect. It's not a massive change. Change has come too little and too slow. And that's why we're thinking that interdisciplinary methods, talking to artists, talking to scientists, working together with journalists, with artists, people who give the message in different ways, is something that we all need to think about. That the answer is not going to come from one discipline. It's going to come from all of us working together, because it's a global problem and it's a problem that we all need to solve in our own ways.
Electric anymore. Not of the universe, born into our species against itself. From my conscience, whether a common soul, whether a common soul, a saint, a martyr, my best, I hope I do try. I beg you,
Thank you, Arati and David, for giving me the opportunity to contribute to the book. It's beautiful, and thanks everyone for being here. That was an excerpt from one of my collaborative artworks, Electric Animal. It starts, I, electric animal, dust of the universe, born into a species against itself. I think that sets the stage. Anyway, I have been, one of my earlier artworks, I was called a biochemist turned philosopher, turned television producer, turned visual poet. And since that was written, I have since taken up a position in an engineering department and have recently been working on biology. So it may seem like I'm all over the place, but actually all of these different endeavors, including the art, have been in pursuit of a really almost singular goal: beauty, truth, and the good. And in trying to seek those things, which I think are greatly related to one another, I've left no stone unturned. I've spent 50 years, half a century, frantically seeking beauty, truth, and the good. And why? Because I think that we need to understand the world in order to live better within it. And what have I learned from that? Well, I've learned that our understanding just has limits. No matter how far I go into any of these disciplines, I reach a limit, and I find that, well, actually, we don't understand mathematics fully, and mathematics even has contradictions in its foundations. We don't understand physics fully, biology, where there are new understandings coming all the time, yet we're acting in the world in a very determined and confident way. So what have I learned from this? I've learned that our knowledge is limited, but there is some advice, I guess, that could come out of this, and I'd like to share that with you. Our knowledge being limited means we need to limit our own actions. We obviously live in a world that is under-resourced for our ambitions. So we need to curb our ambitions. We need to use less resources. But I'll end on a happy note. There's one resource, and this is where art comes in, that is unlimited, and that is creativity. And creativity only functions within a limit, actually. So we can always draw on our own creativity to find joy and inspiration. And in fact, when it comes to art, science, and engineering, and I think art, I've been working a lot on combining all three. The artists, the scientists, and the engineers should be on equal standing in our projects. And in fact, all of our R&D and product deployment should always be drawing on that unlimited creativity that we find most deeply in artists, but which each and every human being both possesses and has a right to express. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ali. We're nearly at the end of what we laughably call the formal proceedings. We're going to continue after this to show you some longer films, meaning that they'll be projected on the screens. You can watch while you talk to each other and eat more popcorn. Tara is going to spin some tunes. We think that's going to work. But just before that, this has turned into quite a long story. And we wanted to give a great big thank you to all the creatives who contributed and, in a funny way, feel like a big family all over the world now. My thanks to Arti Prasad. If it's not fun, it's not worth doing. That's what we said for the last 5 years. Craig, Sebastian, and our friends at Human After All for 2 years of creative disagreement and discussion that produced this beautifully designed book. Mike, Yana, and Gemma for all their help with the Kush program. Ali, Himani, Mariana, Oriole, who came along today, and all of the people who've joined us online. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thanks to Aviva, Ian, Marina, and Susie for being interviewed, and Abolaji, Rivka, Luke, and Nana for doing the interviews. We want to thank Oliver and Jordan from the Good Growth Hub for organizing the interviews. Check them out. They're just across the park. Really interesting group of people. Thanks finally to Bryony and Sam for their curatorial help with all putting this event together. Big thank you to Mansoor, the Master Blaster, for making transcontinental simultaneous hybrid presentations work, and to Greta and Vinci for making the room exceptional, and for Luke, who's ready to give you more drinks and snacks. And thanks to all of you for coming out this evening and attending online.